discussing 5014 Environmental Management Paper 2, and this is May-June 2021, for which we're given 1 hour 45 minutes to solve. Okay, so today we have the location of Dominican Republic. As you can see that this is towards the southeast of North America, and this is in the Caribbean Sea. We have a key given which shows international boundary, capital city, Ozama River, copper mine, in the second map of Dominican Republic. Then moving on, as usual, you have been given a fact sheet which shows area, population, total number of women, life expectancy, currency, language. So you know that you are supposed to predict that you will be given some calculation question based on the population. Okay, so I have highlighted that part. I've highlighted the part of population, and they have told you that 5.9% of the population of the Dominican Republic were unemployed. So moving on, calculate the number of unemployed people in the Dominican Republic in 2019. So of course, you already know that 5.9% of the overall population is unemployed, right? So 5.9 percentage, so it will be divided by 100 into the overall population, which is 11 million. Million is 10 to the power 6. So you have 5.9 into 100 divided by 100 into 11 into 10 to the power 6, which is basically 11 million. And when you calculate it, you get the answer of 649,000 people. Then the next part asks you that just ways the national parks contribute to economic growth, and we have the idea that there are national parks in different regions of the Dominican Republic. So of course, if you think about the idea of national parks are made to conserve biodiversity, and they promote something that you call ecotourism, right? So to give the idea that you have earnings through the source of ecotourism is very important. So you need to use the term of ecotourism. And then of course, if you move on, ecotourism is basically tourism in a sustainable manner, right? So tourism, which means that it will allow local businesses to grow, it will reduce unemployment, it will help promote the growth of shops and hotels. So as an answer, I have written it here. You can read through it. Then moving on, we have some data for different climatic regions. We have location P and location Q, and you have been given average temperature and average rainfall for both locations. Then they're asking you use the climate data to complete the table for location P and location Q. They're asking you to write month with highest rainfall. So of course, just go through the data and you'll see. So for both the locations, we can see that May is the month with highest rainfall. Then I recorded the data for coldest month and hottest month. Then they're asking you to describe two similarities between the climate at location P and location Q. Use information from the table to support your answer. So again, you can see that May is the month with highest rainfall for both of them. So that's number one similarity. Okay, and then the second similarity is that we need to look for a particular period, okay, for wet season or for hot season, and you will see that the drier season is same for both, right? Why drier? Because you had very less rainfall in that season, okay? So if you see in December for location B, we have very less rainfall compared to other months, and then that period is continuing till March, right? In April, the rainfall begins the precipitation, the average rainfall per millimeter begins to increase, right? So you will not consider April because that's a normal month of rainfall. But from December till March, you have the idea of very less rainfall, so that is our dry zone. Then if we see location Q, you can see that in location Q again, December we have very low rainfall, and then from December to March again we have very low rainfall. So again, as you can see that the drier period is same for both locations, so that is going to be your similarity. Alright, so moving on, the photograph shows a banana plant. Many farmers grow banana plants near location Q. Banana plants are grown at 2-meter intervals in rows of 3 meters apart. Suggest one way that farmers can use the 3-meter strips of land between the rows of banana plants. So of course, you have the idea of intercropping here. If you have some space between the banana plants, you can utilize it for growing crops or even keeping pasture, right? So very simple part. Then we have banana plants grow quickly and produce fruits without pollination. Describe the process of pollination. So whenever you will be asked about pollination, there are some ideas that are compulsory to give. You have the idea of anther, movement of pollen from anther to stigma of another plant of the same species, right? So this statement is going to get you 2 marks, okay? And then the second idea is of how it is being moved or transported from one plant to another plant by the idea of insect pollination or wind pollination. And then you can describe it further that in insect pollination flowers have brightly colored petals and nectars to attract insects, and while in wind pollination they have long feathery anthers protruding out of the plant so that pollen can be carried away in large amounts, right? So that is the idea that you need to give for this part. Then they're asking you, banana plants are grown by subsistence farmers and commercial farmers in the Dominican Republic. Describe the benefits of subsistence farming. So we know that there are 2 types of farming. We have subsistence and we have commercial, right? Commercial is solely for sale, while subsistence is to fulfill a family's own needs, right? So if you have the idea that a family is self-sufficient, that's the word. If it's self-sufficient, if it can grow enough to feed itself, you have the idea of non-dependency or self-sufficiency. So that's number 1 point. And then whenever you're talking about this sort of situation, you need to have the idea of rural to urban migration as well, right? So if you have the idea that you have a reliable food supply, you are also going to prevent, that is also going to prevent rural to urban migration, right? Then you have another idea that if you have surplus, you can also sell it, right? And if you're selling it, that's eventually going to contribute towards GDP. That's going to help boost the local economy as well, right? And that is eventually going to help that farmer earn income as well. Okay, so this is the whole idea of subsistence farming. Then moving on, some banana fruits are exported to Europe and labeled as organic, fair trade bananas. Okay, so why organic, why fair trade? Okay, we'll see. Organic banana plants are grown without using chemical fertilizers or pesticides. State how farmers who grow organic bananas can control pests on their banana plants. Okay, so if you have the idea, they're already telling you that they are not using chemical fertilizers or pesticides, right? So if they're not using it, okay, it's right here, without using. Okay, so if you have this idea already here, we should have known, okay, that we're not using chemical fertilizers, we're not using pesticides. So in our syllabus, according to our syllabus, we have the second idea of biological control. Biological control, we're going to increase the number of an organism that is going to naturally control the pest, right? So that is the idea of biological control. Moving on, state how farmers who grow organic bananas can ensure the soil has enough nutrients. So again, you have the idea that we're not using chemical fertilizers. So other than chemical fertilizers, we have the idea of animal manure, crop waste, or compost, okay? Then moving on, state one negative impact of using chemical fertilizers. We know that if you talk about pesticides, you have the idea of spray drift. And whenever you're talking about fertilizers, you have the idea of eutrophication. Write one term, okay? Because they're asking you to state eutrophication, that's it. Fair trade is when companies agree to pay a fair price to farmers for a crop. So just one reason why people in Europe want to buy fair trade bananas. So, okay, here comes another idea again, that whenever you are doing such questions and you don't have an answer to it, you should try to think whether it's ethically right or not, right? Because there's some things that happen because of ethical reasons as well, right? So if you talk about why it's right to pay fair price to farmers for a crop, so that's again because it's ethically right? So that's going to be your direct answer, okay? Then moving on, we have bananas are stored in refrigerated containers at 13 degrees Celsius and loaded onto ships. So you know that's a cold temperature, right? Then it takes 20 days to transport the bananas to Europe by ship. The transport accounts for 60% of the carbon footprint of banana production. Okay, so a lot of carbon dioxide being produced, because they have the idea that carbon footprint is the amount of carbon dioxide produced or released into the atmosphere. They're asking you then, define the term carbon footprint. Okay, so again, a very clear definition that you need to memorize. Amount of carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere as a result of a particular individual, organization, or community, okay? Then suggest why bananas are kept at 13 degrees Celsius during the journey to Europe, because we know that, of course, we don't want them to rot, right? We want to maintain its quality, we want them to stay fresh, we don't want them to ripen too quickly, right? Then we have the idea, okay, and you need to be really clear the marks should be equal to the points you're given. The number of points you're giving should be equal to the number of marks awarded, right? So if you have 2 marks here, I am writing 2 points, right? So the idea of maintaining quality and the idea of not ripening too quickly, okay? Then a banana chip travels at constant speed of 15.4 km per hour. This journey takes 20 days. Okay, so you can already see that we are given speed in 15.4 km per hour, but the time is given in days. So we need to convert days into hours because we have the idea that they're asking you distance in kilometer, right? So kilometers, so your speed is completely fine, but you need to convert your days into hours. We know that one day has 24 hours, so 20 days are going to have 24 into 20, 40 hours. And then we have the formula speed equal to distance upon time, okay? And then you have another formula. From that you're going to derive speed, distance is equal to speed into time, right? Just rearranging the formula, and then you're going to place your values, you're going to calculate, and I got 7,392 kilometer, or you can even estimate, but just give the right answer, okay? Then moving on, a student notices that some banana plants have long dark streaks on their green leaves. This is caused by a fungal disease called black sigatoka. The student surveys 2 organic farms, X and Y, to compare the number of diseased leaves on banana plants. Okay, so you have 4 into 4 banana plants in the middle of marks out. The student marks out one plot of 4 into 4 banana plants in the middle of farm X, and one plant of 4 into 4 banana plants in the middle of farm Y. Okay, so you have the idea that you have the same area for both of them, right? So you have the idea of fair comparison here. Uses a random number table to select 8 banana plants from each plot. Okay, again, random sampling is gonna be a fair comparison, right? Records the number of leaves per banana plant with black sigatoka disease. So what you're recording here is you have 2 farms and you're recording the number of diseased leaves for 8 plants you choose from each farm, okay? Then they're saying compare the patterns, and you've been given patterns, and then they're asking you to compare the patterns. Of course, you can see, you can use main terms to compare them. You can say for farm X, it's randomly positioned, it's scattered, spread out. For farm Y, it's gathered at a place, it's more clustered. Then they're saying explain why both samples are representative of the banana plants on each farm, because the idea of random sampling, right? Because it's an unbiased approach, okay? Then moving on, draw a table the student can use to record the results of this journey. Okay, so if you talk about a table, I already told you that we have 2 farms. Alright, so for a table, you already know that there are 2 farms, right? And you are taking 8 plants from each farm, and you're recording the number of diseased plant leaves, right? So how are you going to make a table? You need to have the idea that you're going to have definitely plant number for both of them, right? And then you have the idea that you're going to have what else? You have number of diseased leaves for both of them, right? So the heading that's going to come above will be the one which you have, which applies to both of them, right? Then if you talk about here, again, we're going to have 8 plants, so just number them 1, 2, okay. First of all, let's separate farm X and farm Y. So farm X right here, and then farm Y. Okay, farm Y right here. And now we can start numbering. So 1, 2, we know that there are 8 plants, right? 3, 4, all the way to 8, 6, 7, and finally 8. Okay, so that is how your table is going to seem like, and of course you need to construct it properly using ruler, okay? So don't forget to construct it, okay? Otherwise you are going to lose 1 mark, okay? So this is how it seems like in summary, okay? Next we have, one farmer said there are more leaves with black sigatoka fungal disease when the weather is warm and wet. Okay, so we have 2 conditions, that the weather should be warm and wet if we have more leaves with sigatoka fungal disease. Okay, so the weather is warm and wet. Okay. Then we have been given climate data for farms X and Y, and then they're saying identify in which months you expect the fungal disease to spread quickly. Of course, so you want months. You don't have the idea of consecutive here. You just want the months which are warm and which are wet. Okay, so just look through the table again, and you're gonna see that May, September, and October are the warmest and wettest months. And of course, that is going to be the reason as well why this disease is spreading quickly in these months. Then they're saying one method of controlling black sigatoka fungal disease is to remove the disease leaves from the plants and then burn the leaves. Okay, so if you talk about, then they're asking you about advantage and disadvantage. If you talk about first very clear disadvantage, you have the idea of air pollution, right? Because you have the idea of burning. And if you talk about advantage, you have the idea that you're plucking out separately. So it's a very well targeted mode of action, right? And it's going to be something that does not require training, right? And then if you talk about another disadvantage, of course, it's going to be time consuming, it's going to be labor intensive. So you should train your mind to think this way. Whenever you are looking at a technique, you should see whether it's time consuming, whether it's labor intensive, whether it's well targeted or not, whether it requires training or not. If you're going to think about these points, you're definitely going to get to an answer, okay? Then we have describe one method scientists can use to produce a new variety of banana plant that is resistant to black sigatoka. So we learned about two things according to our syllabus. We have the idea of genetic engineering and we have the idea of selective breeding, right? And then we're simply going to describe it. Selective breeding is just the idea of crossbreeding with a plant that has a resistant gene, and genetic engineering is just the idea of passing the gene from a species to that particular species. You want to alter the gene using recombinant technology. Recombinant technology is just the idea of cutting using enzymes so that we can insert the particular gene required, okay? Then moving on, the drawing shows part of a large copper mine in the Dominican Republic. The mine is expected to be open until 2024. So that's why this mine pollutes a nearby stream after rainfall events. So you have been giving a picture, you are supposed to answer according to the picture, right? So if you see here, what is this? This is surface runoff, right? And also you can see that the air around it is deforested, right? So of course, why is it going to contaminate water bodies or nearby stream? Okay, because of the idea of surface runoff and because of the idea that the land is barren, so eventually water is going to get contaminated, right? Then you're asked to make a graph, which I've already plotted for you. So the idea is that your graph should cover more than 75%, okay? So you need to devise your scale according to that, and it's not important that you start your graph from 0, okay? You just need to start your graph from a number according to which you think that your graph is going to cover 75%. So I started with 2, and so as you can see that if this is 2, this is gonna be 3, right? And each box will be for how much? 0.1, okay? This is how much each box accounts for, right? So you have this simple idea, okay? And then we have plotted a graph. I've plotted a graph. Okay, and then they're asking you to calculate the average world price. So to calculate the average world price, how do we take out average? We just simply add the values and divide them by the number of years or months of the independent value given, right? So here I was given years, I just counted the years, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, that is total of 6 years. So whatever your answer of the total value of world copper price divided by 6, okay? And I got 6, okay? Then we have the mine made a profit in 2016. Suggest reasons why this mine might not be profitable in 2022. Okay, so again, whenever you're doing paper 2, you should be very clear that you need to refer back to the information given. Okay, so if you see, it's following a particular trend, okay? From 2014 to 2017, it fell, okay? And then after 2017, it began to increase again, okay? So, okay, it increased only till 2018, and then it began to decrease again. Okay, so what we can predict is that till 2022, it's going to decrease, right? And if we have the idea of decreasing world copper price, we also have the idea that if copper price is decreasing, then what is the reason why copper price is decreasing? Because the demand is dropping, because we have the idea that even if we have limited resource but we have high demand, that limited resource is going to have very high price. So if we're saying that something has very low price, we know that the demand is dropping, that is why the price is also dropping. Okay, next we're given this scale, okay, and a diagram, which a map of the copper mine. Okay, so copper ore is extracted from the mine. The copper ore is treated at the mine using water. The wastewater from the treatment is stored in the waste pond. Estimate the area of the waste pond. So how are you going to estimate the area? Okay, so you know that for area you need to record two measurements, length and breadth, and we have to estimate. So we're going to estimate it using the same formula we use for rectangle, that is length into breadth, right? So I'm going to put my scale from here to here, and I'm going to measure how much this is in centimeters, right? So if I have, for example, 1 kilometer is equal to 6 centimeter, right? Then I'm going to measure the breadth. I know that I need two measurements, the breadth and the length, right? So for example, my breadth comes as 2 maybe, right? So centimeter into centimeter, kilometer under kilometer, right? But I want area in kilometer square, right? That is 9 kilometers. So I'm going to put an x here. I'm going to calculate. So that is going to be 2 equal to 6x, and x is going to be 2 divided by 6. And this is the idea of kilometer. I'm going to do the same for my length, and when I'm going to get my length, I'm going to multiply it with my breadth, and I'm going to get an answer for area. Okay, so that is how I'm going to solve this part. And then let's move on. We have the next part in which they're asking, suggest reasons why some local people are worried that the waste pond will leak or burst. Okay, so why will they be worried? Because of course if we're talking about bursting, it's gonna flood, right? And then you know that it's gonna flood, it's gonna cause a lot of more things. It's gonna destroy crops, damage houses, and it will contaminate the water sources, and of course the animals or humans using the water source can be negatively affected, right? So all of these ideas. Then the mine is expected to close in 2024. Suggest reasons why the government has made the mining company responsible for monitoring the waste pond until 2040. Okay, so we already know that if we are saying that the waste pond might leak or burst, so if the mining company will go from that area, even if the waste pond is going to leak or burst, the mining company will not be held responsible for the damage caused, right? So the government wants to ensure that in case of any damage, mining company will be the one to be held responsible for any damage caused, or even if we're not talking about damage, it should monitor the waste pond so that it can prevent any such scenario in future, right? So we have this idea. So this is because in future there is a risk that pond may leak or burst, right? So in case of any damage, the government wants to hold mining company responsible to pay for any losses, right? This is not pay, this is pay. Then government wants mining company to monitor the pond to prevent any such situation, right? Then moving on, many tourists visit the national parks of the Dominican Republic every year. Some tourists that visit the national parks are ecotourists. One ecotourist says, when visiting a national park, I try to have a very low impact on the local environment. I know it is impossible to have zero impact. Explain why it is impossible for ecotourists to have zero impact on the local environment. So of course, if you think about it, definitely they're going to use vehicles to reach that national park, right? So you have the idea of emissions of carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas leads to global warming, right? And then you have the idea that, of course, even if one ecotourist is causing very little litter, if you talk about many ecotourists causing litter, on a large scale, it's going to become much more than that of an individual, right? So again, having an impact on the local environment. Then you have the idea that of course they're going to trample on the vegetation when they're going to walk, or they may simply disturb the wildlife through their presence, right? Or noise pollution, right? So because of these reasons, they cannot have zero impact on the local environment. Then the Dominican Republic has one marine reserve in the Caribbean Sea. The marine reserve is 20 kilometers from the capital city, Santo Domingo. Only scientists are allowed to visit this marine reserve to study the many coral and fish species. Okay, so you can see scientists, and you can see a transect line, and then they're asking you name the type of sampling the scientist is using. So always remember, whenever you have a transect line, transects are used for systematic sampling. Okay, so always systematic. Then suggest 2 reasons why the squirrel survey is repeated every year. Of course, because we want to study how much pollution is affecting that particular location, or to record changes over time, number of corals, number of fish species, sea level, temperature, etc. Okay. Then there are many coastal sites around the Dominican Republic where tourists dive underwater to see the tropical species of coral and fish. Suggests how data from surveys of the marine reserve can help to manage the impact of diving at other coastal sites. So if you see, you have a marine reserve where we have no tourists allowed, right? And you have another location where tourism is common, right? So of course you can compare how much we're contributing to damaging the environment, right? And then you have an area that is unaffected by any human activity, so you'll definitely find rare species there, right? So surveys can help manage impact in this way. And definitely, if you know the extent of damage, you will be able to take effective measures at the right time, okay? So that's another thing. Then they're asking you, the Dominican Republic has several zoos. Suggest one benefit and one limitation of using zoos to preserve biodiversity. So if we talk about zoos, we need to know that zoos are responsible for creating awareness of the endangered species. They carry out captive breeding programs so they can maintain the populations of certain species and then reintroduce them into the wild. Okay. However, the problem is that it sometimes becomes difficult to reintroduce animals into the wild, or there is less diversity in zoo, right? So this is the idea when we're talking about zoo, right? Then the Ozama River flows through the middle of Santo Domingo into the sea. When there is a storm, people living near this river are at risk of flooding. The government has opened an emergency help center to manage the short-term impacts of flooding. So there's 3 ways that the emergency help center can manage the short-term impacts of flooding. Okay, so what are they talking about? They're talking about emergency help center, right? So what can the emergency help center do in terms of managing the short-term impacts, right? So short-term impacts. So of course it can provide medical aid, short-term impacts which are going to occur, at that moment of flooding. Okay, so you will have injuries, you will have casualties. Okay, displaced people. So you should have emergency shelters, food aid, water, medical aid, and carry out evacuation procedures. Then after a storm near Santo Domingo are polluted with plastic waste from the city. Suggests 2 impacts on the environment of burning the plastic waste removed from the beaches, right? Okay, so if we're talking about burning, you have the idea that air pollution is going to be caused by this, right? And we also have the idea of bioaccumulation. Why bioaccumulation, you may ask? Because we have the idea of burning here. Then how is bioaccumulation coming? Because of the idea of microplastics, right? So I'm going to write it down here. Mention this, be specific. Microplastics, right? Which are produced on burning, okay? Let me put it in bracket. Okay, so simple as that. Then it's moving on. Okay, then you're given a monitoring station measures the amount of rainfall and river discharge at one location on the Ozama River. The river discharge is the total volume of water flowing past the point on a river in 1 second. So it's basically the speed, right? But you have the volume of water, right? Then the river floods when the river discharge is greater than 20 meters per second. So if you look at what's given to you, you can already see that you have been given river discharge here, and then they're saying greater than 20 meter cube per second, okay? Then shaded area under the graph to show when the river is flooding, okay? So when it will be more than 20, it will be flooding, right? So just create a line at 20 and then shade the area above it, okay? Then they're asking you calculate how many hours after peak rainfall. So you have peak rainfall here at 8 hours, and does the peak river discharge occur? So we know that this point here is the peak discharge, and it's occurring at 32, right? 32 hours. So after how much time of peak rainfall is it occurring? 32 minus 8, and that will give you 24, okay? Then let's move on. It takes many hours for the river discharge to return to the same level as before the storm event. Suggest reasons why. So first you have the idea that water is gonna keep moving, right? It may be absorbed by the soil, but eventually it's gonna flow as groundwater flow. It's gonna move through the soil, through flow. Okay, the water that infiltrated is gonna eventually become groundwater flow. Then of course you have the idea that even after rainfall you have the water still moving, runoff continuing for hours, and then because vegetation can slow down its movement, but eventually it is gonna make its way towards the river, but it's gonna take some time. You're gonna get marks to write the different processes because of which it's gonna take time, and those processes are interception, thorough flow, groundwater flow, surface runoff. Okay, then explain why flooding can be beneficial in some areas. We already know, explain, so you have to give a point and just explain it. So flooding is going to leave behind a layer of silt, okay, and silt makes the soil fertile for farming, right? And you can further explain that if we have fertile soil, we're gonna get high crop yields and boost the economy, surpluses, okay? Then two students decide to measure the rate of flow of water in a small stream that joins the river. The students have the equipment shown in the diagram, and then they're asking you to describe a method students can use to measure the rate of flow of water in the stream. Okay, so you have the simple idea that you have a stream, right? Okay, and you have been given this, right? And you want to calculate the rate, okay? So if I'm talking about the rate of flow of water, I need to have the idea that I'm calculating velocity, which is displacement upon time, right? And the idea of notebook and pencil is really clear, that I'm just going to record these two values in my notebook, right, of the distance and time. So I can mark my distance using marker pole. Okay, I'm going to put two marker poles right here, and these are representing the distance, right? So this is, for example, my starting position, and this is my final position, right? I'm going to put the float in water. For example, this circle is my float. Okay, and I'm gonna start my stopwatch, and I'm gonna measure time t taken for the float to reach the final position. So I have measurement of distance, I measure of distance, time, both recorded in my notebook using pencil, and then I'm gonna simply use the formula velocity is equal to distance upon time and calculate the rate of flow of water in that small stream. Okay, so that is it for this paper, and I hope you find this useful, and stay tuned for more videos.